You are listening to the What a Word podcast, an interview-style podcast where guests bring their unique experiences and insight on culture, life's challenges, and faith. Each episode is seasoned with words which will inspire and encourage. Now here is your host, Ryan Sharp.
That is the part that is, I think, as somebody who is spiritual, connected, I think it has been really hard for me because you realize how much the things that we see as that we thought were reprehensible, you know, people are literally in their churches praying for the opposite to happen. You know, we're praying for somebody who, you know, is a philanderer and a thief and is convicted and is and all of these things. And so, you know, I know whose prayers God hears, but still, it is absolutely cloaked in that sort of a messaging. And so this is going to be really a complex time, truly.
Yeah.
Because, you know, is it more important that you don't have abortion rights? You have a return to traditional anti-feminist values. You have a return to sort of racialized ideals of norms about who should work and who, you know, what positions they should hold. Ryan, it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah. So I'm talking with my friend Sacha Page, born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, a curious and creative thinker with a passion for exploring how people make meaning and express post-colonial identities in Caribbean culture. Her educational journey, an MLIS from Rutgers University, a degree in Anthropology from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a BA in History and Archaeology from the University of the West Indies. She loves to travel and is a budding textile design enthusiast, finding inspiration in patterns and traditions from around the world. She also enjoys listening to gospel music and escaping into the world of fiction. Dedicated to lifelong learning, she brings creativity and curiosity to everything she does, from connecting with new ideas to enriching the lives of her 2 teenage children. Please join me in welcoming my friend Sacha Page to the What a Word podcast. Welcome, my friend.
Man, it's been so long. I knew you when.
Oh man, you know, I'm in an interesting space, and I want to thank you for coming on. Honored to have you. I'm in an interesting space where I am coming to terms with who I am as an immigrant. And with all that's happening around us, I just want to have conversations now with people who inspire and who connect with my experience. And I'm hoping my listeners and viewers will allow me to just sit in this space for some time, because many of my listeners represent those groups, right? So I'm hoping from my conversations with, so far this season, just all women, we can have some nuance and context for the lives we're living and find some inspiration even in spaces of chaos. So, Sacha, I want to thank you so much for joining me again. Listeners should know that I left the island on or about 1986, came to the States, and I would visit my island, Kingston, Jamaica, from time to time. And I came back with new, having read some books and having some tough conversations. I was learning about how people of color existed, what their experiences were in America. And it really caused some angst. It caused an awakening. And Sacha was one of the few people who I could just, while on that journey, while trying to figure out my space in this world was a no judgment zone. And I want to give you your flowers up front and let you know how much I appreciated that while I was navigating as an adolescent, young adult. I could talk to you about racial issues, my cultural experience, culture shock with no judgment. But I'm curious, um, how did you know, or how did you have the ability to relate to people like myself without judgment?
So I think if you're judged, you don't like judgment. And I think not that I was judged harshly, but I think now that I am on my own journey of figuring out myself, I think there's a part of me that is fiercely open-minded because I do not like that feeling. So I think that's number one. And I think I come from immigrant parents themselves who came back, who returned. So my mother emigrated to the United States when she was pretty young, like maybe 9 or 10. And so she had a very specific immigrant experience in Chicago. Being, one of 3 children or 4 children of color in schools in the 1960s, learning about Dr. Martin Luther King getting shot, understanding segregation like up close and personal, and just really feeling what that was like, which fueled her return. Literally it was just like when she got an opportunity, she's like, I'm going back to Jamaica because I can't stand this, which is really different from, I think many of our compatriots, our nation folk, Jamaicans, have a sort of and understandably so, America is the land of milk and honey, and so you go and there's a certain reverence for it. So my mother did not have that reverence for it, and in fact, handed in her green card. Who does that, right? In the 1970s, was just like, I'm going home. And then my father, went on a banana boat to England and lived that experience of, the no blacks, no Irish, no dogs situation. Couldn't find a place to rent, and getting into hard situations, getting beat up
Oh man.
by folks. And so the lore in my household was always very pro-Jamaican,
Hmm.
pro-black, like as long as I'd remembered myself,
Yeah, yeah.
and unabashedly so. And so I got it, and I think both of us understood, because I think there was a way in our church experience that really, as I said, Adventists are extremely upwardly mobile, and a part of that mobility many times is to migrate.
Yeah.
And so there's a way in which we always sort of elevated the people who did, and elevated the American experience, elevated the accent, elevated the access. And so you and I kind of, of course, you come back and it is life. It's not all it's painted to be, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and unfortunately, I think our culture is a very interesting thing. I think we are some of the most creative and insightful and just energetically striving for more and better, and maybe not better, but better for ourselves, and to be more economically prosperous. But the outcome of that can be sort of we paint a shiny patina on the experience here that is not real.
Wow.
And so when you're here, you realize what it is like.
Hmm.
And the reality of it is not always what we report. you know. It's kind of like that Miss Lou song poem where, you know, she's like, you come back and you don't even have a little twang, like, you know, come on, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
and sort of that, you know, we celebrate that, you know, we see it at the airport if you go to Norman Manley at Christmas time and
Mm-hmm.
you come home with your finest and your winter boots in the sun hot.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because it's because that's how we, you know, we want to um we want to feel seen and upwardly mobile, and in our culture that's a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
To sometimes to our detriment, right? Like, I mean, you think about what the culture has become, which is because of our proximity, I think, to the US, you know, extremely materialistic and a lot
Sure.
more individualistic than it has ever been. And so I think we connected on how that on the realities of that,
Yeah.
without even me being there yet. But and then coming and of course for myself. But I know there were many arguments then, which continue today, right? Which is, you know,
Sure. Sure.
the immigrant here, in
Mm-hmm.
metropoles, you know, whether New York or Florida or wherever, being like, well, you know, of course we have free jobs and we're making it, and you know, why can't the African American?
Sure. Sure.
Why can't, you know, why can't they rise the way we rise?
Mm-hmm.
Um, And you know, there's some of those are some of the same echoes that we're talking about, that sort of colonial or post-colonial mentality, which is very, you know, okay, or maybe not even so much it's colonial, but it's also that sort of the American dream, you know, you pull yourself up, like that's a possibility. Um, and it is, but there are absolutely costs and consequences. So yeah, we connected on that, my love, we did.
You know, I think about even that period to your point, man, and I was talking to an immigration practitioner a number of weeks ago on the podcast, and she says a part of her counseling to clients who have no legal opportunities here, you know, she says to them, you know, going back home isn't the end of the world. And not until she said that did it occur to me, to your point, that many of us took a all eggs in one basket approach to immigration. And, you know, if America didn't work out, you know, we just resolved to the fact that our lives were not with all the possibilities. Our lives were now limited to being in this place. Not many people I know, and I'm going to speak in a few weeks to a few people who decided to go back home about their own experience, which seems to mirror those of writers before who left the States and found peace. But to your point, I think um, many people had decided that it was all or nothing in America. And the psychic toll, the emotional toll, um, I mean, we can't even put a number on how
We
people were
can't.
impacted. Yeah, yeah.
We can. And I think it's impacted our island, and it's of course impacted here. And I think
Mhm.
um and our children.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
I think it's we can't I think we can't divorce that feeling from the immense pressure that the immigrant, and I can speak for Jamaica, but I think the Caribbean immigrant feels. I think Jamaica especially, because I can speak for it. We are not. I mean, so we're color. There are issues of color, of course, at home. You know, well, you know your skin color, but I think what it is rooted in the people who had access to power were not dark skinned, right? And so we the majority is, And so the only way to sort of continuously grasp for that was to leave. And we've continuously left, from, Panama Canal days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just over time, we've just been leaving. We
Yeah.
have different
Yeah.
waves of immigration, and it
Mm-hmm.
continues.
Mm-hmm.
Currently it's really interesting being in London and meeting so many teachers and nurses that are still being recruited, right? To come to England and still have to deal with ridiculous things, so they don't get, certification the way others do. And so they cannot still box you into sort of a lower pay grade. But of course we rise and we continuously do that. And I think, we do that on either side of the Atlantic, wherever we are, and we are everywhere.
Where? Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, uh, everywhere. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you will find us. We're one of those traveling sorts of um, personalities. I think Jamaicans are definitely that way, that sort of a constant movement.
Mm-hmm.
We we really tie a lot of energy to that. Like, it's in the blood, it's in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it is hard to there have been arguments, especially in, from the current Jamaican administration about, oh, stay home, or what, or contribute to the country by being in the country. But it's a hard argument to drive, and I think it's going to be a big culture shift. And I mean, what will this administration hold for Jamaicans here now, meaning United States?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what will that mean? I mean, but I don't think it's going to change things. I mean, because look at what happened with the whole Windrush generation in
Sure,
England.
in
Right?
England.
They
Yeah.
literally, after asking for them to come, 20 something years, decide to send folks back.
Mm-hmm.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it still is because of the wide scale sort of a capitalistic, materialistic mindset. The
Mm-hmm.
quickest way to more
Mm-hmm.
is not on the island for many.
Mm-hmm.
For some it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's changing.
Mm-hmm.
But the quickest way is to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, to go against that is interesting. But I think you're right. I think things are changing, because I've now heard of other, I'm hearing more stories of people moving back,
Yeah. Yeah.
and people leaving. And I think as certain classes of people kind of decide in their minds that
Mm-hmm.
it's no longer worth it. Because I think too that I always knew people, usually upper middle class, or yeah, upper middle class and up, who would never reside in the United States because
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
can't live the way they would like in the United States. So the United States is, and actually being outside of it now, I realize how much of the grind.
Mm-hmm.
The grind is so heavy. It's a
Yeah.
heavy
Yeah.
grind.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For
And
sure.
it's a heavy grind without um, often maybe not the best social networks, or
Mm-hmm.
the ability to enjoy the
Yeah.
fruit of labor. You hear so many people who have labored and labored and labored, and then
Mm-hmm.
not been able to enjoy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we're I'm looking forward to seeing what that might be like, because there are, the islands do hold really great things. The educational system is not as bad as people would like to make it out to
Sure.
be.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
it has its challenges. But I've actually heard of somebody who moved their children home. We're like, you know what, I don't want to
Subject them.
subject them to
Per
this.
se.
And I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I see that, like, not everybody has the opportunity to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there's that part of it, and on the other part of it as well. So that's sort of, the cultural,
Hmm.
need to go beyond or to leave Jamaica. But the bottom line also, Ryan, I think is also really important, is that this economy needs and will
Hmm.
continuously need, in order for them to maintain, unless something changes, they need cheap
Yes.
labor. And so people are gonna come.
Yeah, yeah.
What the sad part about it is that how you're treated when you get here,
Right. Right.
cheap labor. Um,
Yeah.
but the farm work program is not going away. The hotel work programs are not going to go away. Um,
Restaurants, house cleaning,
Restaurants, people are
nanny,
still going to
senior
need,
care. Yeah.
exactly, senior
Yeah.
care. They're still going
Yeah.
to need
Yeah.
nurses and teachers and all
Sure. For
those things.
sure. Yeah.
So it's that push and pull.
Hmm. And I'd
It's
be interested to see the scholarship on the migration experience because when I left, I'd be honest, man, I wasn't learning anything in school. But 12, 13, I wasn't focused. It would have been a waste of anybody's time for me to take CXC and them things. Zero.
but something, Ryan. I think that's the thing, is that we are. I don't know if it's changed, but I know that I
Mhm.
probably hasn't, because again we are so focused
Yeah,
on
yeah,
sort of the
mm,
movement upward, right? That
yeah,
upward
yeah, yeah.
mobility is
Sure,
everything for
sure,
us.
sure.
Um, we've who is at 12 and 13 ready to do that? Like,
Right,
I mean,
right,
without some serious rest, and as a boy as well. I mean,
right, right, right.
it would have worked out. I
You
know
think so? I hope so, man.
you would have been fine. You probably would have ended up the same place you are now,
Man, you know,
from just in a
maybe I
different
need a do-over.
oriented way,
Maybe I
in a
need a
different
do-over,
way.
man.
And it's an interesting thing too, because
Yeah.
just anecdotally, there's so many young people as well who taken out of the Jamaican environment, which I think, for many years, and I think is still some way that way, very, academically focused.
Mhm.
And you go, depending on the place that you land in the United States, it can really throw you off,
Yeah.
if that is your
Hmm.
path. And it can, I mean, it's blood, sweat, and tears to
Yeah.
to to continuously do that. But I guess that's the thing with us. We find a way when we're not home, right? We find a way.
Man, I'm hoping we can do more for people who are coming here now because when I came with a group of other young people. And many of them had probably been their parents maybe 10 years before, etc. But all of us were in this space, many of us in the public school system, where we didn't know how to navigate. We didn't know what was expected of us, besides learning and doing well in school. But there were other issues that were the backdrop to our experience. There was racism. There was, we were dealing with all of that and trying to make sense of that world. Um, I was trying to twang all of that. I mean, you could tell no, it
Oh, you,
just,
you gotta you gotta fit in, love.
yeah, yeah, I was
To
trying to fit
survive.
in because even though, nobody gave you like a blueprint, you said, in your mind, even as a child, you were like, there must be ways that I can be accommodating to those around me so that I can fit in. And that took a toll, man, because you are a child, but you're trying to appease employers because I worked at a pretty young age. You're trying to appease teachers. You're trying to appease authority figures generally. And there was no blueprint or workshop as we enter the world outside of our faith Christian bubble or Christian community bubble. And I'm hoping that, we can do more for people now who are in those same spaces in terms of preparing
Absolutely.
them. But I can honestly tell you, man, I thought at points I was going to dash even my hope away when I began to learn about history and where people were because of history and my faith community, you pointed out in our discussion earlier, represented, that white supremacy, colonial mentality setup. So, the arguments we were having in church every other week about drum, about music, about worship preferences, all stemmed from a larger picture that many of us didn't want to name, or we didn't have the courage or the awareness to name it for what it was. It still
Mhm.
exists today, largely, but we had all of these systems contending for our who we were and how we were going to figure things out. And that, in terms of when I look back at where I was, that was, I believe, the most painful for me because there were points where I wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No.
Everything that defined me to that point also affirmed or gave confirmation to the systems that were oppressive. And I wanted to
Absolutely.
throw everything away at points. And that was painful in terms of my own development. How was it for you being on the soil and
Um,
having the awareness you had?
so it was, I want to stick a pin here just really quickly though, Ryan, before we talk about me. I think the hopeful thing I have
Hmm.
about the current generation and those coming is that as much as people bemoan social media, and they do for the young and the teenagers, what it has done, it has sort of built community and
Hmm.
awareness. So my daughter would be like, oh mommy, she'll show me something about, you have a Jamaican mother when, and it's all, they list all the different things, and I'm like, yes, okay, here, like presents, like, yeah, I do that. But so I think there's sort of that um awareness of their commonality, right? Because there's so many first gens and
Hmm.
second gens, and
Sure,
and they
sure.
get it, and they speak about it, and the fact that you speak about it and name it is
Hmm.
the first step. Because if you don't, before, if you don't talk about it, then it's not really real. It's only real to you. Whereas
Sure,
I
sure.
think and I think that's also it has been the beauty of this sort of collaborative space that is
Mhm.
social media, is that, whether it's the West African immigrant or the Caribbean
Sure.
immigrant or the first gens have this voice, and we can, you know coalesce over shared experience, because there are so many shared
Of
experiences,
course, of course, of
so
course.
many shared experiences. So I think, in a sense, that is the difference. And I think we, our generation and above, need to be super careful. And I know this sounds so, because like I have family members, my sister
Hmm.
particularly was like, social media is not the best, especially for children. But
Hmm.
what it does, especially in my opinion, and this is, I know I'm very different from everybody else, but what it does is it can create spaces to coalesce over experience,
Sure, sure, sure.
and
And that's so
to
needed,
be
man.
seen, and to create things that are funny, and to talk about, whether it's food, or the fact that we all store, nobody stores, you open an ice cream container, and it might be, or not ice cream, but a cookie container, and it's probably not going to be cookies, or
Yeah, yeah,
things
yeah.
like that. Like, I think we can, we coalesce over humor,
For sure, for sure, for sure.
and people who are living, outside, and dealing with those things. So, um, I think it's going to be. I think it is different from what we experienced, for sure,
Hmm. Hmm.
because I think
Hmm.
we did that in that good old. I guess, what are we? We're Gen X, I guess. You
Yeah.
know, you know, we basically had to figure it out.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But okay, so back to me. I think my experience has been really, I guess, really kind of like a web. I didn't, because of my background, I didn't actually come here. I came here when I was older. So I
Hmm.
came here as for graduate school, and I'd already lived a year in Denmark, if you remember. Um, And so I kind of came to the US with all of what my parents gave me, which was a healthy dose of skepticism,
Mm.
a very, very healthy dose of skepticism, and also a good amount of just sort of starry-eyedness as well. And so I kind of hit the road. I was always going places, taking the bus. When you take the bus too, that's like the best thing, right? Because you really get to see the realities of people. And I will caveat that by saying, like, I was just in the Northeast. It's not like I went to the South, so I went to school in Massachusetts and kind of had family and friends in New York, New Jersey, and would travel between there. But it was always it was always a little bit scary for me. I feel like the US I've had a healthy dose of, like, I understand the ways in which it might seem really shiny, but right beneath that can be super dangerous. And there are things that stand out to me and make me slightly paranoid when I'm here. I think, Amadou Diallo, for example, because I was here for that, like, really, like, maybe my first year here, he got murdered, and it just really made me afraid for police. Like, I've been afraid, like, just viscerally,
Sure,
of
sure.
serious visceral reactions to that sort of authority, because I understand how quickly it can go
Yeah.
against you. And I think as well, I realize as well that it is a very it's a very tenuous space, especially if you don't have. I've always been able to have some, whatever, but I realize just how quickly, if you don't, how close you are. And I think all of us do, I think, which is a reason why, so they talk about the French, right? The French will riot and demonstrate for anything, right?
Right, right.
Americans really don't do that as much, because they understand literally that if you don't have that paycheck, what can happen? And that has always been something that I have a healthy, I don't know, respect, fear for, I
Sure,
guess.
sure, 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 sure.
And then in terms of, in some ways, it's made me a little bit more introverted. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't think I have, outside of the church space, and in some ways, because I think I'm a pretty friendly person, and I will make friends in work situations, but you realize as well how focused people are
Right.
on whatever they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really interesting, because I think maybe it's age, but you realize how hard it is here to find, again, outside of church communities, like, deeper friendships and relationships,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because you just don't know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you do and you don't.
You do and you don't. Yeah, 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 yeah,
You do
yeah.
and you don't. So I think the US is a very, as I said, you can be on a bus and be beside somebody, and they'll tell you their life story. So I think there's that part of it that
Mm-hmm.
people are very open here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
super
Mm-hmm.
open.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't think it doesn't always sort of translate to longer term. And hey, that really just might be me. It might be me. Um, but yeah, so I came to graduate school here, and I was in Massachusetts, and I think it was a pretty good time. I think I benefited from being Jamaican. I think that was the first time you realize too the way in which people treat African Americans and especially new immigrants differently, especially in an
Yeah,
academic situation.
sure, sure.
I had friends who, I feel like I was able to thrive because I didn't always see, I didn't always see what was actually happening. I didn't always recognize microaggressions for what they were. I just kind of didn't see it. Um, and I would see, my other African American friends struggle in some ways, and I'd be like, man, oh my gosh, like it really feels like they were out for them, in ways that they just weren't for me, because it'd be like, oh, you speak so well, or I love your accent, or all of that. The change for me, I think, was when I had children
Yeah.
in this country, and that has been a wild ride. I think in the beginning, so I was very still, like, oh, you're the Jamaican, like you look for the best thing, right? So we here, and my beautiful child, so smart. I know she's so smart, whatever. So you're like, okay, I taught a public school. I toured the private schools, and the private schools look amazing. And so you put them, in this private school, and then you're like, oh, you're the only one, it'll be fine. And then you were like, 2 weeks in, you're like, whoa. Immediately, there were issues, just immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a time when I think, when you talk about what racism really is, which is that those specific power structures that hold people in place economically, and politically and socially. That's, I think, the first time I truly experienced racism in that way is with children. Because before I was like, I had one foot in Jamaica and one foot here, and
Right.
whatever, in that sense. But that visceral feeling of it, absolutely, with my children,
Wow.
absolutely. You know, whether it's sort of, oh, that she can't play because her hair is not the right texture, or just the aggression, micro and not, and having to navigate that, alone, because I'm, in general, we again did the Jamaican thing, which is like, where you go where you can afford, and you feel like this is the best path for moving up, right? We always are figuring that part about, truly. And it doesn't always translate. And so by the time, I would say she was maybe 12 and my son was 13, I have not 13, 9, totally different feeling about education. There was so I was one of those people, oh, HSBCUs, no, oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
because
It's interesting. It's interesting.
you realize how much you definitely need that support, and you need that coalescence, and it's not always, again, because we didn't, I think, especially as West Indian, well, Jamaicans, or my set of Jamaicans, we didn't always make meaning around skin color per se, right? Because out of many one, whatever, in Jamaica is about browning, whatever. But when you come here, you realize that there are reasons why people would want to do that, specifically. And yes, there are lots of people who definitely want to aim for the Harvards and the Yales, and there's absolutely very, very good reason for it.
Yeah.
But you realize how much you're missing, and how much you will be alone, and how much you will have to bear cognitively, the cognitive dissonance around being the only one. And I think that's the thing with both my children is that, unfortunately, they have been in those spaces of being the only one all the time. And I can't really, I never grew up that way. And so it's not always, you can give them the platitudes, right? But what does that really mean for someone growing up, and while I was trying to, do the best for them, and give them the best opportunities and, okay, whatever. And just by virtue of, where we ended up in terms of where we ended up here, you realize that it can be really damaging. Really.
Sure.
I don't want to speak for my daughter because I think, as my son says, he's like, he only started thinking a year ago. At least I love his honesty. He's like, I only started really being aware of myself a year ago. So I'm not going to speak for him, but I know for her, she really, it was only until when we moved to England for those 3 years that I think she finally was like, whoa, this is what I'm experiencing here. Because I was saying, okay, this is what you're experiencing, right? Like, you're experiencing racism. People are being horrible to you. But she wasn't seeing it because that's all she'd ever known, right? And I was always like, okay, well, we need to move schools, or don't you see what's happening? And she just wasn't, she's like, no, I'm fine,
Jeez, man. Yeah.
And then when she moved away from it, she's like, wait, you realize how much you have to bear, just kind of like what you're talking about, you bear so much by yourself, because people can't understand or refuse to, or you're the token, or they don't really know or care, and put you in that, small box, of token. And, so on her return, I think what's interesting is that she's seeing it now, and kind of can know, because she's seeing it and can name it, it's different, and she can handle it in a different way, and is now talking about, things like doing an HSBCU, which I think is great.
Being a Black-owned business extends so much further than making great products. It's about representing the 8 out of 10 Black businesses that failed within the first 18 months of launch. It's about giving hope to the 4% of startups that are founded by Black women. It's about using our influence to affect change in the communities that look like us, and proving to the next generation that no matter the color of your skin, nothing is impossible.
I wonder how those moments were for you as parents, because something similar happened, and it wasn't until the theme of what you just said seemed to be, what do I want for my children? I think even asserting my own boundaries, it became more amplified because of the world my children were living in and how I was speaking to them about protecting theirs. And I realized I wasn't protecting mine. Because I would say, for example, to my kids, nobody's supposed to shout at you, they're not supposed to touch your hair. And I was saying all of these things to them that some of which I wasn't creating for my own self. And then I started creating it after because I'm like, how can I tell my children how to navigate this world when I'm not navigating it? And maybe I never learned to navigate it because a part of me thought you'd be safer doing things this way, not, for example, saying to people, who are you talking to? Keep your voice down. Because I worked in all of these spaces where people just shouted at you whenever they wanted to. But I realized soon after I had children and I was telling them how to navigate or trying to guide them, I began now creating my own boundaries for people. I don't know if they inspired me to do it or I don't know where, but after you spoke about helping your children navigate, I wondered how those conversations were for you and Volney. I mean,
Really interesting.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think I don't, sometimes I wonder if we did it right. Like, I think what tended to happen was,
Mhm.
you know, so full disclosure, so my daughter has been to several schools because basically, well, not well, especially in the younger years, she maybe went to one, two, three. Because when something would happen and there was always that tension, I'd be like, all right, we're out, and he was more, wait, we can't keep moving her. What does that mean? What does that mean for her and the continuity of things? I mean, and she did end up somewhere that she stayed all the way till sixth grade, like first through seventh grade,
It's
actually.
a good stretch, yeah.
But by fifth grade, I was looking for other places because you recognize what's going on. But what I think it was always, it's really interesting, and I think that's the thing that when you are, an immigrant to a place, you recognize that you do have to, as you said, adapt, right? You adapt and you fit in. Um, and I think the only way you can the only way you can take yourself out of that is if you, and which is what I think many people try and do, is to have enough to say, I have enough money to be like, all right, fine. Most people don't reach there.
They're
But I
vulnerable,
think, or
yeah.
many people don't reach there, but I think what tends to happen is that you have this sort of an attitude of, I can, or we can code switch our way out, or we can sort of fly under the radar, or we can sort of maybe not only fly under the radar, but how do you get involved?
Sure.
um, either you get involved or you stand on the outside and look at it. And I think we kind of did both, both getting involved, both standing on the outside, until there's some things that are just toxic, and you
Non-negotiable, yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you they're non-negotiable.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
But what was interesting, I think, with George Floyd, and that,
Hmm.
that was that flashpoint, was what one of the things that came out of it was, on social media there was a Instagram page that was dedicated to people of color, basically talking about their experiences in the area that I live. And
Mm.
there are, so while I was saying, okay, well, I will move her to this school because it would be better, there is literally no better. And they do various versions of petty racism
Sure, sure,
across the board.
sure.
And so I think that is the realization, right? Like coming back to where we are now in this point. And I think Black folk and Black women have known this, is that, you know, it's not, there are really no real safe havens for us outside of, places that we make meaning, right? So
Sure.
it is sororities and fraternities, whether it are our church communities, various community organizations. For us, it's not, that whole notion of the well-meaning is, it goes to a point and it stops. Absolutely stops. And so you have to be super expedient and super resourceful at using it for what it is, and then taking what you can and making the best of it, because there really isn't, even in the sort of well-meaning spaces. And I mean, the area I'm in has, for example, several Friend schools, which are Quaker. And as you know, the Quakers were quite, a big part of, say, the abolitionist movement, and have been, sort of, for a long period of time, been aligned with peace and with peace and justice sort of initiatives. But, in the schools that they've actively run, in the end, it's the same things continuously over and over again. The same sort of racist tendencies. And so even and as many people have rightly pointed out, that even in and I don't like to use the word left, because I think it's become so in so many ways, because it really doesn't mean anything anymore. We're really just center. We're not even left or right anymore. I mean, it does seem to be some things that seem to be pretty right, but we've really moved right. Even with the progressive mindsets of people around us.
Sure.
In the end, the privileges that are afforded people who are not melanated will continue, because they're not giving them up. No matter how enlightened it seems that people are, because it's a part of the DNA, it's a part of the system, it's a part of what makes this country work. And I think that is the part that I get why some, you have the disaffected, because you kind of want to put up your hands, like, what can I do? How can this change? And I would say, though, that, and that's it, and that is the power of, I think, art and music. That if there's so much influence, positive and negative, but influence nonetheless, and influence moves needles, that we can attribute to art and the creation of the creative process. And you can see what happens is, whenever we have, because we are so creative, whenever we create and we influence, there is a movement to pull it back.
Sure.
As a librarian, I can tell you that within the last 20 years, the plethora of just amazingly illustrated, and the storytelling of people from around the world, especially people here, people in the Caribbean, making these wonderful children's books, for example, because I can children's literature.
Sure.
Just powerful, and having the ability to absolutely affect young people. And it has been affecting young people. And what happens? It's just, so it says no, to me, there is no it's not an accident
Yeah.
that you have book banning. And if you look at what book banning is, it's not really, the sensationalists will be like, oh, it's pornography and all of this stuff. They're actually not doing that. And it's like actually a small group of people, but they're very targeted and very effective at basically, trying to get rid of, the stories of humanity, it's not, and so I would especially say to, my Adventist brothers and sisters, be really careful when you talk about, whether it's trans people or people who are, what do you call it? The
LGBTQ.
Because all stories are important to understand, even if it is just so that it can be seen. Because I know there's that argument of, well, it's a negative influence, but I would argue that one of the main ways we have affected change for everybody, and positive change, is through art, is through storytelling, is through the creative process. And we all catch strains when we start to discriminate.
Sure.
So if you discriminate against this small group, then everybody else is affected. Because as I said, maybe I didn't get to that point, but when you look at some of the things that they're banning, children's stories about Asian American kids, and about African American kids and African American experience, and history, and it is really disheartening, because I think when I have had the privilege to read stories to children that are curated, so I don't, it's not like librarians especially, I think are very thoughtful about what they choose to share. It can be so powerful and truly, life-changing in some ways. And so it's a very interesting thing, because I think we are at the cusp of, we continuously kind of are moving through these periods of cultural, not warfare, but yes, in a sense, cultural warfare. And it's always interesting, because if you look at revolutions around the world, that's what goes first, right? It's
Sure.
it's the books, it's the teachers, it's the education.
Sure.
Those are the things that get attacked first, and unfortunately, we are seeing that here in America, and that's really sad. It's actually quite scary. And so keep your ears up for that.